Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UE's horizon, watching Earth grow smaller in the viewscreen. The blue and green world that had been humanity's home for millions of years was now just another dot among the stars. Around him, his crew worked quietly at their stations, but he could feel the weight of what they were doing. This was not just another mission. This was goodbye. 3 months earlier, Jake had been sitting in a conference room on Centauri crime, listening to the Galactic Council debate humanity's future. The room was filled with representatives from dozens of alien species, each more exotic than the last. The Zephyrians with their crystal-like skin that changed colors with their emotions. The Drachnari with their scaled hides and sharp teeth. The vegans with their multiple arms and large black eyes. All of them had one thing in common that day. They all wanted humans gone. Counselor Vexthara of the Zephyrian Empire had been the loudest voice against humanity. Her crystalline form had glowed bright red with anger as she spoke. Humans are too aggressive, she had declared to the assembled council. They expand too fast. They ask too many questions. They change things too quickly. In 50 years, they have built more colonies than most species build in 500 years. They cannot be controlled, and that makes them dangerous. Ambassador Lisa Crawford had tried to defend humanity. She was a small woman compared to most of the alien representatives, but she had a strong voice and a sharp mind. "We have given more to this galaxy than we have taken," she had said. "Our medical research has saved billions of lives across dozens of worlds. Our technology has made space travel safer for everyone. Our trade networks have brought prosperity to systems that were poor before we arrived. We have never started a war, and we have helped end many conflicts through diplomacy." But the council was not listening. One by one, each species voiced their concerns about humanity. The humans were too curious, they said. They asked too many questions about things. That should be left alone. They developed new technologies too fast. They made other species feel inferior with their rapid progress. They were changing the balance of power in the galaxy, and the older species did not like it. The vote was unanimous. Humanity would be restricted to their home system. All human colonies would be dissolved. All human trading rights would be revoked. All human research stations would be shut down. Humans would be allowed to keep Earth and its moon, but nothing else. They would be watched to make sure they did not try to expand again. Jake remembered the silence that had followed the vote. Ambassador Crawford had stood up slowly, her face showing no emotion. "I see," she had said quietly. "If that is your decision, then we accept it. We will need 90 days to evacuate our people and equipment from our colonies and stations." The council members had looked surprised. They had expected arguments, protests, maybe even threats. Instead, humanity had simply accepted their decision and asked for time to leave properly. Counselor Vexthara had actually looked confused, her crystal skin shifting from red to a puzzled blue color. "You accept our terms?" she had asked. "We accept your decision," Crawford had replied. "We will not fight it. We will not argue about it. We will simply leave." And that is exactly what humanity had done. Within days of the Council's decision, human ships began arriving at every human colony and outpost in the galaxy. The evacuation was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. It was organized, efficient, and completely thorough. Humans did not just pack up their personal belongings. They took everything. On the agricultural world of New Harvest, human colonists carefully dug up every earth plant they had brought with them. They dismantled their farming equipment piece by piece. They even took the soil treatment facilities they had built to make the alien ground suitable for earth crops. When they left, the planet looked exactly as it had before humans arrived. On the research station orbiting Kepler 442, Dr. Karen Walsh supervised the removal of decades of scientific data and equipment. She was a tall woman with gray hair who had spent most of her life studying alien biology. "Pack everything," she told. Her team. Every computer, every sample, every piece of equipment. Leave nothing behind that could be useful to anyone else. Her assistant, Ben Cooper, was a young man who had been born on the station. He had never seen Earth, and the thought of leaving the only home he had ever known was hard for him. "Dr. Walsh," he said as they loaded another crate of research materials, "why are we being so thorough? Why not leave some of our research for them to continue? It could help the galaxy." Dr. Walsh paused in her work and looked at him with a sad smile. "Ben, they do not want our help. They want us gone. So we will be gone, completely. Let them see what the galaxy looks like without human contributions." The same scene was repeated across the galaxy. Human merchants closed their trading posts and took their goods with them. Human engineers dismantled the space stations they had built. Human doctors packed up their medical supplies and equipment. Human teachers gathered their educational materials. Human peacekeepers abandoned their posts in conflict zones. Most surprising of all, humans also removed things that other species had not even realized they were depending on. The communications relays that allowed fast messages between star systems had been built with human technology. The navigation computers that most alien ships used were based on human software. The universal translators that allowed different species to communicate were powered by human. Linguistic databases. Jake watched from his ship as the last human transport lifted off from the former colony of New Boston. The planet had been home to 3 million humans who had built a thriving city among the red mountains of the alien world. Now it was empty, with only the natural landscape remaining. Even the buildings had been taken apart and loaded onto the transport ships. "Captain," his communications officer called out, "we are receiving a message from the Draknari patrol ship that has been watching us." "Put it through," Jake said. The face that appeared on the screen belonged to Commander Kethmer, a Draknari, officer with the typical scaled skin and sharp teeth of his species. "Human captain," he said, "my government is curious about your destination. Where are your people going?" Jake looked at the alien commander for a moment before answering. "We are going away, Commander. That is what your council wanted. We are going far away. But where exactly?" Kethmer pressed. "Surely you must have a destination in mind." "Beyond the rim," Jake said simply. "There are unexplored systems out there. We will find new worlds, far from the established galactic community. You will not have to worry about us anymore." Kethmer's expression showed confusion. "But that region is uncharted. It could be dangerous. There might be hostile species, or worlds that cannot support life. Why take such risks when you could simply accept the Council's restrictions and remain in your home system?" Jake smiled, but it was not a friendly expression. "Because, Commander, humans do not accept cages well. We would rather face unknown dangers in freedom than live safely as prisoners. Besides, we have learned much about survival and exploration in our time among the stars. We will manage." The transmission ended, and Jake turned back to watch Earth disappear behind them. Around his ship, thousands of other human vessels were making the same journey. Every human in the galaxy was leaving, heading for the unknown regions beyond the galactic rim. They carried with them everything they had learned, everything they had built, and everything they had discovered during their time as members of the galactic community. But they were also carrying something else, a quiet anger at being rejected, and a determination to prove that the galaxy had made a terrible mistake. The Council thought they were getting rid of a problem by exiling humanity. What they had actually done was unleash something far more dangerous than an aggressive young species. They had created a civilization with nothing left to lose. 6 months had passed since the last human ship disappeared beyond the galactic rim, and Admiral Kethmer was beginning to understand that something was very wrong. His flagship, the Dominance, drifted helplessly in space near the former human colony of New Boston. The massive Draknari warship that had once been the pride of his fleet was now nothing more than an expensive piece of space junk. The engine failure had started small, a minor fluctuation in the power systems that his engineers had dismissed as routine maintenance issues. But as the hours passed, the problems grew worse. Critical systems began shutting down one by one. The artificial gravity flickered on and off. The life support systems struggled to maintain proper atmosphere. Most importantly, the faster-than-light drive that allowed his ship to travel between star systems had completely stopped working. "Sir," his chief engineer, Vextal, approached, with a worried expression on his scaled face. "I have identified the problem, but you are not going to like the solution." Kethmer turned from the view screen where he had been staring at the empty space where New Boston used to be. "Explain." "The engine control systems are based on human-designed software," Vextal said. "The hardware uses human-manufactured components. When the humans left, they took their technical support teams with them. They also took their part suppliers, their maintenance protocols, and their replacement equipment. Without these, we cannot repair the ship." The Admiral felt a cold chill run down his spine. "Are you telling me that our most advanced warship depends on human technology?" "Not just depends on it, sir. It was built with it. The humans did not just sell us finished products. They integrated their technology into our systems so deeply that we cannot operate without them. And, sir, there is something else you need to know." Kethmer waited, dreading what he was about to hear. "I have been in contact with other ships in the fleet. They are all reporting similar problems. Every vessel that has human-designed components is starting to fail. The newer ships are failing faster because they have more human technology built into them." Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out. On the trade station Harmony Prime, Counselor Yithada of the Cooperative Union stared at reports flooding in from dozens of star systems. Each report told the same story. Systems were failing. Equipment was breaking down, and there was no one left who knew how to fix it. The counselor was a member of the insectoid cooperative species, with 6 arms and large compound eyes that could process multiple data streams at once. Right now, all of those eyes were focused on the disaster reports covering her desk. How extensive was human involvement in our infrastructure? She asked her aide. The aide, a younger member of her species, clicked his mandibles nervously. "More than we realized, Counselor. We are finding human technology in places we never expected. The water purification systems on Vegan 7U's human-designed. Filters, the atmospheric processors on the mining colonies, run on human software. Even the communication satellites that connect our worlds were built with human components." "What about replacements?" Yithada asked. "Surely we can manufacture our own versions of these technologies." "That is the problem, Counselor. We do not understand how most of these systems work. The humans never shared their complete technical specifications with us. They sold us the finished products and provided maintenance services, but they kept the actual knowledge of how to build these things to themselves. We have been using their technology for decades without truly understanding it." The situation was even worse than the counselor had feared. As reports continued to arrive, a pattern became clear. Humans had not just been members of the galactic community. They had been the foundation that held it together. Their technology was everywhere. Their services touched every aspect of daily life. And now that they were gone, everything was starting to fall apart. On the industrial world of Forge Prime, factory owner Grexstow watched his production lines shut down one by one. His factories produced the advanced materials that were used in starship construction throughout the galaxy. The work required precision tools and automated systems that could handle dangerous chemical processes. All of these tools had been manufactured by human corporations. How long before we can get replacements? He asked his production manager. Sir, the human companies that made these tools are gone. They took their factories with them when they left. I have contacted every supplier in the galaxy, but no one else makes equipment this advanced. Without these tools, we cannot maintain our current production levels. Grexta looked out at his massive factory complex. Thousands of workers depended on these jobs. Hundreds of worlds depended on the materials his factories produced. What are options? We can try to reverse engineer the human tools, but that could take years. Or we can reduce our production to levels that our older, less efficient equipment can handle. Either way, we are looking at massive economic losses. The economic problems were spreading faster than anyone had anticipated. The Galactic Stock Exchange, located on the neutral world of Commerce Central, was in chaos. Prices for basic goods were rising rapidly as supply chains broke down. Companies that had depended on human-manufactured components were declaring bankruptcy. Entire industries were grinding to a halt, but the most alarming reports were coming from the medical sector. On the research station orbiting Medicus Prime, Dr. Vornik faced a crisis that threatened billions of lives. The Crimson Fever, a deadly disease that had been eradicated 50 years earlier, had returned. 3 cases had been reported on different worlds, all within the same week. How is this possible? Dr. Vornik asked his research team. We eliminated this disease decades ago. His assistant, Dr. Krillana, pulled up the historical records. The disease was eliminated using human-developed treatments. A vaccine that prevents crimson fever was created by human researchers. The antiviral drugs that cure infected patients were manufactured by human pharmaceutical companies. The diagnostic equipment that allows us to identify the disease early was built with human technology. Dr. Vornik felt a sick realization wash over him. And all of that is gone now. Yes, sir. The humans took their pharmaceutical facilities with them when they left. They also took their research data, their manufacturing equipment, and their medical expertise. We have been using their treatments for so long that we never learned how to make them ourselves. What about our stockpiles of vaccine and medicine? Limited, sir. Most worlds kept only small emergency supplies, expecting to be able to order more from human suppliers when needed. Those supplies will not last long if the disease spreads. The situation was becoming desperate, but there was worse news coming from the military sectors. Fleet Admiral Zexter of the Hegemony Navy discovered that his forces were almost completely dependent on human technology. The pulse cannons that armed his ships were based on human energy projection designs. The navigation computers that guided his fleet through hyperspace ran on human software. The shield generators that protected his vessels from enemy fire used human-invented defensive fields. Sir, his tactical officer reported, we are receiving reports from across the fleet. Ships are experiencing system failures at an alarming rate. The newer vessels are being hit harder because they have more integrated human technology. Zexter studied the tactical displays showing his fleet's condition. Red warning lights indicated failing systems on dozens of ships. What about combat? Effectiveness? Severely compromised, sir. Without functioning navigation systems, our ships cannot coordinate fleet movements. Without working weapons, they cannot engage enemy targets. Without operational shields, they are vulnerable to even minor attacks. Sir, if a conflict broke out today, we would not be able to defend our territory. The Admiral realized that the galaxy's military forces were not just weakened, they were on the verge of complete collapse. And there were already signs that their enemies knew it. Pirate raids had increased dramatically in the past month. Border skirmishes that had been quiet for years were flaring up again. It was as if every hostile force in the galaxy could sense that the established powers were suddenly vulnerable. Meanwhile, In the outer systems, where humans had once maintained peacekeeping forces, old conflicts were resurging with frightening speed. The rim wars between the hegemony and the free worlds. Alliance had been prevented for over a century through careful human mediation. Human diplomats had worked tirelessly to keep communication channels open between the two sides. Human peacekeeping. Forces had maintained neutral zones that prevented minor incidents from escalating into major battles. Now those mediators were gone, and the neutral zones were undefended. Within weeks of humanity's departure, the first shots were fired in what would become the bloodiest conflict the galaxy had seen in generations. The galaxy was learning a harsh lesson about the difference between thinking someone is useful and understanding how essential they really are. The Galactic Council had seen humans as junior partners who contributed to galactic society but were not truly necessary for its survival. They were discovering that they had been catastrophically wrong. 2 years had passed since humanity vanished beyond the galactic rim, and the galaxy was dying. Fleet Admiral Zexter stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching what remained of the hegemony navy limp back from another failed battle against the Free Worlds Alliance. Of the 50 ships that had left port 3 weeks ago, only 23 were returning. The rest were either destroyed or drifting helplessly in space with failed systems. The war that human diplomats had prevented for over a century was now raging across dozens of star systems. What had started as minor trade disputes had exploded into full-scale battles when the human peacekeeping forces disappeared. Without neutral mediators to calm tensions, every disagreement became a reason for violence. Without human-maintained communication networks to keep dialogue open, misunderstandings turned into declarations of war. "Admiral," his communications officer called out, "we are receiving distress signals from the Third Fleet. They are requesting immediate assistance." Zexter felt a familiar surge of frustration. "What is their situation?" "Engine failures across the entire fleet, sir. They are stranded in the Kepler system with no way to return to base. The engineering crews report that they need replacement parts that are no longer available anywhere in the galaxy." The Admiral closed his eyes and tried to control his anger. This was the same story he heard every day now. Ships breaking down because they could not get human-made replacement parts. Weapons failing because they could not update human-designed targeting software. Navigation systems going offline because they could not access human-maintained star charts. His once mighty fleet was slowly rotting away, one failed component at a time. "Send what spare parts we have," he ordered, "and prepare a message to Fleet Command. Tell them we need to discuss ending this war before we lose our entire navy." On the other side of the conflict, Alliance General Korthik was facing the same problems. Her forces were equally dependent on human technology, and they were falling apart just as quickly. The difference was that she understood what was happening and why. She had been one of the few military leaders who had opposed humanity's exile from the galaxy. "General," her aide approached with the daily casualty reports, "we lost another cruiser yesterday. The UFS Defiance suffered complete system failure during a routine patrol. All hands were lost when their life support systems shut down." Korthik took the report, but did not look at it immediately. She already knew what it would say. Another ship lost not to enemy fire, but to the slow collapse of technology that no one knew how to maintain. "Have our engineers made any progress in understanding the human systems?" "Limited progress, General. They have managed to jury-rig some temporary solutions, but nothing that will work long-term. The human technology is simply too advanced for us to replicate quickly. Our best estimates suggest it would take decades to develop equivalent systems from scratch." "Decades we do not have," Korthik said grimly. "Send a message to the Hegemony Command. Request a ceasefire so we can discuss ending this war. We are destroying ourselves faster than we are destroying each other." While the military forces tore themselves apart, the civilian population was facing an even worse crisis. Dr. Vornik stood in the emergency medical center on Centauri Prime, surrounded by patients dying from diseases that should have been easily treatable. The crimson fever had spread to over 40 worlds, and the medical community was helpless to stop it. Doctor, his assistant Dr. Kralena approached with test results. The death toll has reached 12 million and is climbing rapidly. The quarantine procedures are not working. The disease is spreading faster than we can track it. Dr. Vornik looked at the data with growing despair. The crimson fever vaccine that had protected the galaxy for 50 years was running out. The human pharmaceutical companies that had manufactured it were gone, taking their production facilities and technical knowledge with them. Attempts to recreate the vaccine had failed because no one understood the complex biotechnology that humans had used. What about the other diseases? He asked. The situation is equally bad across the board, sir. Without human medical expertise, we are seeing the return of dozens of diseases that were thought to be eliminated. A vegan plague has appeared on 3 worlds. The Zephyrian bone rot is spreading through the crystal cities. The Dratnari scale disease is affecting their military forces. We are looking at a medical catastrophe that could kill billions. The economic collapse was accelerating the health crisis. On the trading hub of Commerce Central, Counselor Vexano reviewed financial reports that showed the complete breakdown of galactic commerce. The numbers were staggering. Interstellar trade had dropped by 70%. Unemployment had reached record levels on dozens of worlds. Entire industries had collapsed when their human-supplied equipment failed. Counselor, her economic advisor, brought her the latest reports. The banking system is on the verge of complete failure. The human-designed financial networks that processed credit transfers between star systems are breaking down. Without these systems, worlds cannot pay for imports or receive payment for exports. We are seeing a return to primitive barter systems in some sectors. Vexano studied the reports with growing alarm. What about the manufacturing sectors? Production has fallen to levels not seen in centuries, Counselor. The advanced manufacturing systems that most worlds depend on were all built with human technology. As these systems fail, worlds are being forced to return to older, less efficient production methods. This means higher costs, lower quality goods, and much reduced output. The Counselor realized that they were not just facing an economic recession. They were watching the collapse of modern galactic civilization. How many worlds are requesting emergency aid? Over 200 so far, Counselor, and the number is growing every day. Worlds that were prosperous and self-sufficient just 2 years ago are now unable to feed their populations or maintain basic services. Meanwhile, far beyond the galactic rim, humanity was thriving in their new home. Commander Lucy Patterson walked through the corridors of the settlement ship New Horizon, observing the construction of their first major colony on the world they had named Haven. The planet was beautiful, with blue skies and green forests that reminded everyone of Earth. But more importantly, it was theirs, free from the restrictions and regulations that had limited human development in the galaxy. Commander, Intelligence Officer Dan Kelly approached. With the latest reports from their monitoring stations, we are receiving some interesting communications from our former neighbors. Lucy looked at the data with satisfaction. The monitoring stations that humanity had secretly established along this galactic rim were providing detailed information about the collapse they had left behind. How bad is it? Worse than our most optimistic projections, Commander. The rim wars have already claimed over 50 million lives. The medical crisis has killed twice that number. The economic collapse has caused massive starvation on resource-poor worlds. Conservative estimates suggest that the galaxy has lost over 10% of its population in just 2 years. Lucy felt a moment of sadness for the suffering beings in the galaxy, but she also felt vindicated. Any attempts to contact us? 17. Different diplomatic missions have tried to reach us, Commander. All ignored as per our protocols. The most recent came from the Galactic Council itself. They sent a formal message requesting emergency talks. What did it say? Kelly pulled up the message on his datapad. They are offering to restore humanity's full membership in the galactic community. It promised to lift all restrictions on human expansion and trade. They are even offering us permanent seats on the council with expanded voting rights. Lucy laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. 2 years ago, they said we were too dangerous to be allowed freedom in the galaxy. Now they are begging us to come back and save them from the consequences of their own decisions. What are your orders, Commander? Continue the silence protocol. Let them suffer a while longer. They need to understand that their problems are not our problems anymore. When we are ready to return to the galaxy, it will be on our terms, not theirs. The truth was that humanity was no longer the same species that had left the galaxy 2 years earlier. Free from the restrictions imposed by the Galactic Council, human science and technology had advanced at an incredible pace. Dr. Martinez and her research teams had made breakthrough after breakthrough in fields that the Council had forbidden humans to explore. Energy weapons more powerful than anything in the galactic arsenal. Defensive systems that could protect entire planets. Faster than light drives that made human ships the fastest in known space. But perhaps most importantly, humanity had learned to be completely self-sufficient. They no longer needed the galaxy for anything. They had their own manufacturing base, their own resource extraction operations, their own food production systems. They had built a civilization that could survive and prosper without any outside help. The galaxy had tried to cage humanity, and in response, humanity had simply left and built something better. Now the galaxy was learning the price of rejecting the most innovative and productive species they had ever encountered. The cost of that silence was measured in millions of lives, collapsed economies. 5 years had passed since humanity disappeared beyond the galactic rim, and Counselor Vexthara stood before what remained of the Galactic Council in emergency session. The once proud chamber that had housed representatives from hundreds of worlds now held fewer than 50 delegates. Many species had simply stopped sending representatives because they could no longer afford space travel. Others had withdrawn from galactic politics entirely, focusing all their resources on survival. Vexthara's crystalline skin flickered between colors as she struggled to control her emotions. The same being who had once declared humans too dangerous. For galactic society now faced the complete collapse of everything she had worked to protect. Fellow counselors, she began, her voice carrying across the nearly empty chamber. The reports from across the galaxy paint a picture of unprecedented disaster. In 5 years, we have lost more than we built in the previous 5 centuries. The numbers were staggering and getting worse every day. The great market crash had begun 18 months earlier when the Zephyrian currency, no longer stabilized by human financial algorithms, had fluctuated wildly in a single trading day. The crash triggered a cascade of economic failures that spread across the galaxy like a plague. Currencies that had been stable for generations became worthless overnight. Trade routes that had operated for centuries simply shut down. Entire star systems declared bankruptcy and closed their borders to outside commerce. The death toll has reached 2 billion, Vexthara continued, reading from the latest casualty reports. The Crimson Fever alone has claimed 800 million lives across 63 worlds. The vegan plague has depopulated entire colonies. The medical crisis shows no signs of improvement because we simply do not have the knowledge or resources to fight these diseases without human expertise. In the audience, what remained of the galactic medical community listened with growing despair. Dr. Vornik had aged decades in the past 5 years, his once confident demeanor replaced by the hollow look of someone who had watched billions die while being powerless to help them. The diseases that human medicine had conquered were now running wild across the galaxy, and every attempt to recreate human treatments had failed. The military situation was even worse than the medical crisis. Fleet Admiral Zex there had been forced to scrap over half of his ships because they could no longer be repaired or maintained. The remaining vessels were barely operational, held together with improvised parts and desperate engineering. The proud hegemony navy that had once patrolled half the galaxy was now reduced to a handful of aging ships that could barely protect their home system. The Rim Wars have expanded beyond all previous conflicts, Vexthara reported. Without human peacekeeping forces, every old dispute has reignited with unprecedented violence. The Outer Rim territories are in complete anarchy. Piracy has increased by over 1,000% because there are no longer any forces capable of maintaining trade route security. The pirate problem had become critical for galactic commerce. With military forces crippled by failing technology, criminal organizations had grown bold enough to attack major shipping lanes in broad daylight. Merchant ships that had once traveled safely throughout the galaxy now required expensive military escorts that most companies could no longer afford. Many trade routes had been abandoned entirely, cutting off dozens of worlds from outside contact. But perhaps the most devastating blow to galactic civilization was the collapse of scientific progress. Research institutions that had depended on human innovation and methodology were producing no meaningful results. The great universities that had attracted students from across the galaxy were closing their doors because they could no longer afford to operate. Entire fields of study had ground to a halt because the foundational knowledge had been developed by humans who are no longer available to share their expertise. Our scientists estimate that we have lost over 3 centuries of accumulated knowledge. Vexthara continued. Technologies that were commonplace 5 years ago are now beyond our ability to replicate. We are witnessing the decline of galactic civilization to pre-industrial levels in many sectors. The automated defense systems that protected major population centers were failing one by one. These systems had all been designed with human technology and maintained by human technicians. As they went offline, worlds that had been safe for centuries now lay vulnerable to attack. Several colony worlds had already been abandoned because their populations could no longer be protected from raiders and hostile forces. Counselor Yith-Ada of the Cooperative Union rose to address the assembly. Her insectoid features showed the stress of trying to hold together a collapsing government. The question before us is no longer whether we made a mistake in exiling humanity. The question is whether we can survive as a galactic civilization without them. My analysis suggests that the answer is no. The words hit the chamber like a physical blow. For 5 years, the remaining council members had hoped that the crisis would stabilize, that their species would adapt and recover from humanity's absence. But the data showed that the opposite was happening. The collapse was accelerating, not slowing down. What are you suggesting? Asked Councillor Drexmel of the Mining Consortium. I am suggesting that we admit our civilization is dying and take desperate measures to save what we can, Yith-Ada replied. We must find the humans and convince them to return, regardless of the cost to our pride or our political positions. The suggestion caused an uproar among the remaining delegates. Species that had once united in their decision to exile humanity now argued bitterly about whether to seek their return. Some maintained that asking for human help would be an admission of weakness that would destroy what remained of their authority. Others argued that their authority meant nothing if there was no civilization left to govern. Meanwhile, far beyond the galactic rim, Captain Ross Williams stood on the observation deck of the exploration vessel Far Reach, watching the construction of humanity's newest colony ship. The massive vessel was 3 times larger than anything humans had built while living in the galaxy, incorporating technologies that had been developed in the freedom of their exile. Around him, The bustling activity of New Geneva Station showed how far humanity had come in just 5 years. Captain, Chief Science Officer Amy Foster, approached with the latest intelligence reports from their monitoring networks. Our deep space sensors are detecting massive fleet movements in Council space. It looks like every remaining military force in the galaxy is being mobilized. Williams studied the data with interest. The movements were too coordinated to be random and too large to be normal military exercises. What is their heading? They appear to be converging on the coordinates where our ships were last detected 5 years ago. Sir, it looks like they are mounting an expedition to find us. Williams smiled with satisfaction. After 5 years of silence, the galaxy was finally desperate enough to come looking for the humans they had exiled. What is the composition of this fleet? Every species that still has functional ships, sir. Draknari, Zephyrian, Vegan, Cooperative, Hegemony, Free Worlds Alliance. They appear to have set aside their conflicts to work together on this mission. Our estimates suggest they have assembled nearly 1,000 vessels, though most are in poor condition. 1,000 ships, Williams mused. That represents almost everything they have left that can still fly. They must be truly desperate to risk their entire remaining fleet on a search mission into uncharted space. Foster nodded. Sir, what are your orders? Should we continue the silence protocol? Williams looked out at the thriving human colonies, spread across a dozen star systems. Massive industrial complexes that dwarfed anything that had existed in the galaxy. Research stations where human scientists worked without restrictions on projects that the Council had once forbidden. Military. Shipyards building vessels with capabilities that would have been impossible under galactic oversight. No, he said finally. I think it is time for Phase 2 of our plan. Send a message to Admiral Hayes on the Retribution. Tell him to prepare the fleet for return operations. The galaxy has had 5 years to understand what they lost when they exiled us. Now it is time for them to understand what we gained. The truth was that humanity was no longer the same species that had left the galaxy 5 years earlier. They had used their exile to become something far more powerful than they had ever been as members of the galactic community. They had advanced their technology by centuries. They had built a completely self-sufficient civilization. Most importantly, they had developed military capabilities that made them the dominant force in known space. The Galactic Council had created exactly what they had feared most when they exiled humanity. They had tried to contain human power and had instead unleashed it completely. Now that power was coming home, and the galaxy would never be the same again. Supreme Admiral Korevash stood on the bridge of his flagship, a last great warship of the Galactic Council's combined fleet. Around him stretched the largest military formation the galaxy had assembled in over 2 centuries, nearly 1,000. Vessels from every species that could still manage spaceflight. The ships were a mixture of different designs and technologies, held together more by desperation than proper military doctrine. Many showed signs of improvised repairs and jury-rigged systems that barely functioned. The fleet had been traveling for 3 months, following the path that human ships had taken 5 years earlier when they disappeared beyond the galactic rim. It was the largest gamble in galactic history, committing almost every remaining functional warship to a search mission into unexplored space. If this expedition failed, the galaxy would have no military forces left to maintain even basic order. Admiral, his communications officer called out, "We are approaching the coordinates where human ships were last detected. Long-range sensors are showing massive energy signatures ahead." Korevash felt his heart beating faster as he studied the sensor readings. After months of searching empty space, they had finally found something. What kind of energy signatures? Unknown. Configuration, sir. The power output is enormous, far greater than anything in our databases. Sir, I am also detecting multiple fleet formations moving toward our position. The main view screen activated, showing the space ahead of their fleet. What Koravash saw made him forget to breathe. Emerging from hyperspace in perfect formation were human warships unlike anything that had existed 5 years earlier. The vessels were sleek and advanced, with design elements that seemed decades ahead of human technology from before their exile. But it was not just the individual ships that struck fear into the alien admiral. It was their numbers. Hundreds of human vessels took position across the Council fleet's path. Behind them, massive construction ships were visible, along with what appeared to be mobile space habitats that could house millions of people. The humans had not just survived their exile beyond the rim. They had built a civilization that dwarfed anything they had possessed as members of the galactic community. Captain Rick Hayes, commanding the flagship UES Retribution, opened communications with the Council fleet. His voice carried across space with quiet authority that made every alien commander listening understand that the balance of power had shifted permanently. This is the human stellar navy. You are in violation of human territorial space. State your intentions immediately. Koravash struggled to find his voice. The human fleet before him represented military power that exceeded anything the galaxy had seen in its recorded history. We come seeking dialogue with humanity. The Galactic Council formally requests emergency negotiations. Our civilizations are dying without human assistance, and we wish to discuss terms for your return to galactic society. Terms for our return? Hayes repeated, and there was something dangerous in his tone. 5 years ago, your council declared humanity too dangerous for galactic society. You restricted us to our home system and dissolved our colonies. You revoked our trading rights and shut down our research stations. You made it clear that humans were not welcome among the civilized species of the galaxy. We acknowledge our errors, Koravash said quickly. The Council has authorized me to offer humanity full restoration of all previous rights, plus expanded representation in galactic government. We are prepared to grant humans permanent seats on the ruling council with increased voting power. Hayes was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his words would be remembered throughout galactic history. Admiral, you seem to misunderstand the situation. We did not come here to negotiate for the right to rejoin your failing civilization. We came here to inform you that humanity is returning to the galaxy, but not as members of your council. We return as a sovereign power, and the galaxy will adapt to our presence. The human fleet began to advance slowly, their weapons powered but not yet targeted. The movement was precise and coordinated, showing a level of military discipline that the combined council forces could not match. Behind the warships, massive support vessels moved into position, clearly prepared for long-term operations. You cannot simply ignore galactic law and establish territorial boundaries, Koravash protested, though his voice lacked conviction. The Galactic Council has authority over all civilized space. The Galactic Council had authority, Hayes corrected. You forfeited that authority when you exiled the species that held your civilization together. For 5 years, you have proven that you cannot maintain order, cannot protect your people, and cannot govern effectively without human involvement. Your authority is now based on nothing more than tradition, and tradition means nothing to the dead. The truth of those words hit every alien commander like a physical blow. In 5 years, the galaxy had lost billions of lives to wars, diseases, and economic collapse. Entire species had been driven to extinction. Dozens of worlds had been abandoned. The galactic civilization that had existed for thousands of years was dying, and everyone knew it. What do you want from us? Koravash asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Nothing, Hayes replied. We want nothing from you because we need nothing from you. Humanity has grown beyond the limitations you tried to place on us. We have built better technology, stronger economies, and more effective governments than anything that exists in the galaxy. We are returning not because we need you, but because there are humans in the galaxy who need our help. The transmission ended, and the human fleet moved past the stunned Council Armada without another word. Within hours, human vessels were deploying across their former territories, not as invaders, but as liberators coming to rescue the humans who had been trapped in the collapsing galaxy. Medical ships moved toward plague-stricken worlds. Engineering. Vessels headed for systems with failed infrastructure. Military formations took position to protect trade routes from pirates and raiders. The response from the galactic population was immediate and overwhelming. On worlds where human colonies had once existed, alien populations welcomed the returning humans as saviors. Planets that had been dying from disease or starvation suddenly had hope again as human medical teams and supply ships arrived. Star systems that had been cut off from galactic commerce for years saw human traders reopening vital trade routes. But the humans made it clear that they were not returning to their old role as junior partners in galactic civilization. Human administrators took control of failed planetary governments. Human military commanders assumed authority over defense forces that could no longer protect their own territories. Human scientists began implementing research programs that alien institutions had been unable to maintain. Within months, it became obvious that humanity was not just another member of galactic society. They were the dominant power that would determine the galaxy's future. The old Galactic Council still existed, but its authority was limited to systems that humans chose not to directly control. Real power rested with the human stellar commonwealth, the government that humanity had. Established during their exile. Captain Hayes watched Earth grow larger on his view screen for the first time in 5 years. The planet looked exactly as he remembered it, but everything else had changed. Humanity was no longer the eager young species that had once sought acceptance from older civilizations. They were now the dominant force in known space, with technology and capabilities that made them nearly unstoppable. The irony was not lost on him. The Galactic Council had tried to contain humanity's influence by exiling them from civilized space. Instead, they had forced humanity to develop without restrictions or oversight, creating exactly the kind of overwhelming power that they had feared. In trying to diminish human influence, they had made humanity the undisputed masters of the net. Galaxy. As his ship entered Earth's orbit, Hayes reflected on the price of the Council's mistake. They had learned too late that some powers are too valuable to exile and too dangerous to anger. Humanity's silent departure had taught them that the galaxy's greatest threat was not human aggression. It was human absence. The humans were home, but the galaxy they returned to would never again underestimate the species that had once left without a word, and whose silence had changed the course of galactic history forever. The age of human dominance had begun, built on the foundation of the Council's greatest mistake and humanity's quiet determination to prove their worth on their own terms.